I need an adult?
I am an adult! Hello again, I am Blunty, and this is a 100% accurate representation of my mighty, real-life, meat-based beard transportation device. I call it a face, crafted entirely within the character creator of Monster Hunter World. And I am in the process of making a short series of snappy videos from a Monster Hunter newbie's perspective of the most important things a Monster Hunter newbie might need to know, or definitely needs to know, before diving into Monster Hunter Rise, which is releasing on the Nintendo Switch before this month is done, and we are all very, very hyped about it. So, why trust a self-professed Monster Hunter newbie to tell you about Monster Hunter in the first place? Surely it would be better to go to an expert. Well, as a newbie, heavily anticipating the launch of Rise, I've been watching a lot, and I mean a lot, of the established Monster Hunter creators. I'll link a few below that I've been enjoying particularly for your own perusal. And while I have indeed learned some very, very useful things, they, as Monster Hunter experts who make tons of Monster Hunter content, and have done so for many years in most cases, have gathered audiences of Monster Hunter players, so they make content largely for people who are already playing Monster Hunter and already parts of the Monster Hunter community, and already communicating amongst each other about the important things they all need to know. And when these superb creators do make instructional or tutorial stuff to help newbies, sometimes, just out of habit, they can kind of assume knowledge of things that they just take for granted after having played for so long. They don't even consciously think about it anymore. Things that the games don't explain very well necessarily, and things that a newbie shouldn't be assumed to know. And sometimes that's a bit annoying. Like, for example, last night I watched a tutorial video on how the Switch axe works, and they were talking at length about file effects without ever explaining what files were and what the effects were. Just how to activate them. That was annoying. So, I'm hoping some newbie-friendly stuff from a newbie having to learn this stuff the hard way will be useful alongside the superb experts and their tutorials and such. But this video will serve as a kind of intro, a way of framing up and providing perspective and context for what I learned, how I learned it, and why I almost never touched Monster Hunter ever again after my very first try made me abandon it in wild frustration. But not because, as you might assume, because the game is a bit hard. And in this video, I'm hopefully also going to provide some insight into why you should give Monster Hunter a try if you're on the fence about it, or intimidated by its fairly notorious complexity and difficulty. Because I'm going to tell you right off the bat, if you do give it a try, and if you do manage to get it to click, oh, it's just such goodness. Juicy, thick, delicious goodness. So if you're a noob and have questions, or if you're a Monster Hunter veteran and you have corrections or useful tips, you know where to find the comment section, right? It's down below, usually. There's a sub button on the way down there too, and a little bell icon thing you should probably click on, and there's some appreciation thumbs on your way down there as well. I would appreciate you appreciating by clicking on the appreciation thumbs. Oh, and if you are an expert about to mercilessly mock my technique in gameplay, do try at least to be constructive. Remember, I am a self-professed newbie here, and Black Diabolos hurt my feelings enough already over the weekend, and I'm still feeling quite fragile from that experience, so do be gentle with me. Now then, let's frame this all up. How much of a noob am I actually? Well, my first Monster Hunter game was the wildly popular Monster Hunter World, the game that took the long-running series from a relatively obscure cult favorite that saw limited success outside of Japan, games that would sell between 1 and 5 million copies of any given entry in the series, all the way to a game that sold nearly 17 million copies in the form of World. And several million more on top of that with the DLC expansion to World, which was called Iceborne. I jumped on board Monster Hunter World when the PC release happened in the middle of 2018. This was many months after the console release, and it had already gathered quite a bit of hype, so I decided with the PC release that would be my opportunity to jump on board and see what the hype was all about. And I almost immediately bounced off it again after about a dozen or so hours, being almost completely, constantly cranky and confused and baffled and annoyed by it. I tried real hard to stick with it, as every experienced Monster Hunter player kept telling me that It'll click soon. It'll make more sense later. It gets better deeper in. It will become fun soon, I promise. But I never did get to that promised point of it clicking or becoming fun. Now, Monster Hunter is a game designed to be relatively unforgivingly and unapologetically challenging in the spirit of series like Dark Souls, or Bloodborne, or Contra, or Ninja Gaiden. And of course I knew this going in. I knew full well I'd have to commit to getting good and clambering up a learning curve both for the weapons and for the monsters' behaviors and tells and such. It's not a casual arena brawler or a button masher. It's not arcading. But its challenge level is not what frustrated me. I was actually doing okay, survival-wise, in most fights, although the first weapon choice I made wasn't as particularly beginner-friendly as I could have chosen. But I'll come back to weapons in its own dedicated video, because there's a lot to talk about there, and which ones are more beginner-friendly than others, and gameplay styles and such. No, what made me fall off Monster Hunter World the first time I tried it was the baffling user interface. Not the main gameplay one, although it's pretty unique as far as action RPG UIs go when it comes to selecting and using support items and moving between them and such. It just takes a bit of getting used to, but it does work pretty smoothly once you realize how and why it's set up the way it is. No, I'm talking about how bad everything else is between hunts. It's confusing, unnecessarily compartmentalized and separated in ways that shouldn't be separated and blurry in ways that shouldn't be blurry, and the game never explains how to use its own UI very well at all, if it even tries. And when it does try, it makes it more confusing more often than not, and I won't dig into specifics here because, in fact, quite a lot of what I hate about it is actually fixed in Monster Hunter Rise, so it's not necessarily something I'll be digging into in my little series of mini tutorial type videos for newbies, because, quite frankly, a lot of the stuff you had to learn for World won't apply to Rise when it comes to the way these menus work. Like, for example, in Rise, how the weapon crafting and weapon upgrading systems and trees are in the same menu now, and you don't have to move between them to do one or the other, it just flows. And the upgrade tree has been far more readable and flows better and easier to navigate, and even making it clearer what you need to do to get the next weapon upgrades you're trying to progressively craft towards, all of which is anywhere between confusing to infuriating to absolutely hidden to baffling in Monster Hunter World. There are many, many examples in World of this kind of annoyance and the unnecessarily confusing nature of almost every hub-based system and menu and point of contact. If you need huge wikis and countless YouTube videos and guides explaining to new players how basic weapon upgrading works to begin with in your action RPG, then you've clearly done something very, very badly as a game UI designer. And I don't think even the most passionate of Monster Hunter World fans will be able to come up with much of a defense for how a lot of these menus work. This is the reason why they've been rejiggered in Rise to make them far more approachable, far more sensible, and far more flowy. If they weren't broken in World, then why did they change them? And so yeah, I bounced off it, so frustrated at being a decades-long gamer, made to feel like a complete moron who has never played a video game before because everything important about progression was so confusing and messy, and the game did such a god-awful job at explaining itself and explaining its most important mechanics and systems. I just went, you know what? I can play other games. There's lots of games to play. I don't need to put up with this. I'm moving on and I'm never coming back. You had your chance, Monster Hunter World. Too late. I'm out. And then came Dauntless, a game out of a small studio founded by ex-Riot Games devs. Dauntless was a heavily streamlined Monster Hunter type game. The core gameplay was basically the same. Take a team of between 1 and 4 players, select your loadout of armor and weapons, all with unique perks and elemental boosts and resistances and power levels and such, and go to a landscape arena and kick the ever-living hell out of increasingly difficult gigantic monsters in order to collect their parts, in order to craft even better weapons and armor so you can fight even harder monsters. So core gameplay-wise, it was very similar to Monster Hunter. Slow and fast weapon choices, either with concussive or cutting damage types, no enemy health bars, instead you just had to look at the monster and look at its behavior and look at the damage stack on the skin of the monster, or as you progressively break parts off, their behavior changes, their attacks changes, and you'll need to learn all these behaviors and patterns of the monsters to gauge how well you're doing with it and what you need to do next and what you need to look out for and all of that kind of stuff. But outside of that, it was a far more streamlined set of systems. Gathering and crafting and quest progressions were all dumbed way down. And I don't mean dumbed down in a bad way. They were just faster, cleaner, simpler, kind of shallower, but easier to understand. And this was all important because as a free-to-play game, it was vital that Dauntless be accessible and keep players invested and progressing in a nice, rewarding feeling pace, and be newbie-friendly, but be deep enough to keep existing players keep playing and keep playing and keep playing and keep playing, because being friendly and accessible and being deep enough something you can play for hundreds of hours is all very important for the lifeblood of a free-to-play game. And Dauntless works terrific in that system. In fact, I've called it several times one of the best executed free-to-play games I have ever touched. And I've been playing it since it was in beta, and not even counting the untracked hours I played in beta before its real launch, and before it hit the Epic Store launcher, or even counting the time I've spent playing the console versions, I still have over 500 hours tracked in the Epic launcher alone. I'd estimate I'd played at least double that. I'm in 4-digit hours easily with Dauntless over the years. But I'm more or less done with Dauntless now. Years of play and literally uncounted hundreds of hours of very happy gameplay hours later, and I've kind of drained the end game of everything I can pull from it, everything that I want from it. I've mastered every weapon type to a point where I can solo endgame monsters. I've crafted every armor piece and maxed them out. I've crafted every weapon type and every weapon variant within the types and maxed them out. And all of this is one of the many reasons I'm very, very eager for Monster Hunter Rise. I'm ready for a new ride. I'm ready to jump on board a new game with a whole bunch of new players and enjoy it together. See, without World's UI getting in my way, Dauntless let me sink right into the meat of the basic gameplay loop that I wanted, and Dauntless let me really learn my way around a game type I never really got to grips with before. As a gamer, this type of gameplay wasn't something I'd sunk into before. Historically, I'd been much happier with hack-and-slash arcadey action RPG stuff. See, I bounced off World, but Dauntless clicked, and learning a more deliberate, careful, and button-mashing unforgiving gameplay style with easy basics but a high skill ceiling was the first time I felt genuinely compelled and rewarded by this approach to gameplay. I loved Contra for its high action, high skill, platformy shooty gameplay, but I never really got good at it. The same is true of Ninja Gaiden and a few other games from the 80s and 90s, from a time in gaming where often brutal difficulty was an inherited trait from arcade games that were designed to be difficult in order to suck coins out of your pockets. And I never really bothered with Souls and Bloodborne games at all, because neither the gameplay presentation or the grimdark, muddy, brown horror film aesthetics appealed to me at all. Just not my bag. But now burned out on Dauntless, and with Monster Hunter Rise on the horizon, and every little piece of information we learn about Rise, its monsters, its systems, its deliberate design choices to make this the most newbie accessible Monster Hunter game ever before, without dumbing down the late and end game to a point where old schoolers are going to feel cheated or babied by it, well, that gave me an excuse to go ahead and try World one more time. The plan was to try again, just to refresh my mind on the basics of the game's style, Monster Hunter's own quirks, and more than anything else, refamiliarize myself with the terms, the concepts, the items, the way things are described, the way they work, the basic systems unique to the series, so I wasn't going into Rise completely cold on all this stuff, just in case it too wasn't super great at explaining certain things. Took it upon myself to teach myself. I didn't go in with a plan to explore all the different weapon choices too deeply, as I already knew Rise has some new mechanics, especially the wire bug, which is making some impactful differences to the approaches and feel of weapons in comparison to World anyway, especially in the approach to mobility and reach of classically slow and heavy weapons. So I just stuck with the classic jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none weapon. The old sword and board, the old slit and bonk, the old poke and bash, the sword and shield. Frequently referred to by Monster Hunter veterans as the beginner's weapon, I think that does it a disservice. It is easy to learn, but its combo system and skill ceiling is quite deep, and it can feel very rewarding to play. But this time, with a post-Dauntless mindset, I was not only better prepared for the gameplay's style, but knowing that my game time here was only a stopgap measure, a refresher course, if you will, and a way to break out of my Dauntless control scheme muscle memory that I'd built up, I wasn't really concerned with mastering all the deeper mechanics, and thus I only needed a more shallow grip on the notoriously clumsy menu systems, which somewhat freed me from their frustrations this time around. And I have, in fact, been enjoying it far more than my first go at this game nearly 3 years ago now. In fact, where in 2018 I was annoyed for most of my dozen or so hours with it, waiting for the game to get fun, this time around I'm already 38 hours deep into it and have enjoyed almost every single one of them, the exception being the notoriously tediously mind-numbing Zora Magnaros quests. World players, I know you feel me on this. But for the most part, I clicked with it almost immediately this time. Part of it was almost certainly a more approachable weapon choice. The first time I played I went with longsword and never really got the hang of it. And another part of it was my Dauntless experience and the pattern training it gave me for how to fight monsters in this style of game. And part of it was surely, again, knowing that this was only a refresher. I wasn't committing to this game long term. A short-term burst intended to give me a grounding in some concepts I'd find useful going into Rise, the game I actually wanted to sink into long term. But now in World, I have already far exceeded my hunter level and progression that I made in my first attempt at this game. I have just smashed face first into the hardest wall I've ever hit so far, Black Diablos, who is a huge bitch, by the way, and completely obliterated me faster than any other wall monster I've faced so far. I was humbled, to choose one of many words I could use, humbled by Black Diablos. In any case, my travels through this process and keeping a very close eye on the Rise announcements and materials and the demo and other players and other content creators talking about this, I've learned some important things. Things from a newbie's point of view I think will be useful structural foundations on which other newbies can use to start building their own Monster Hunter story going into Rise. I've paid attention to the stuff I needed to know versus the stuff I didn't really need to learn. I've paid attention to what I was using most often, how I was using it, what I was thinking about while I was using it, how I went into a fight, how I prepared for a fight, all that kind of stuff to give me sort of a grounding, a basis of how to structure going forward. But yeah, as I said in the beginning, I'll be sharing what I think is some of the most important stuff for a newbie to learn in a series of videos, hopefully snappy videos, that will certainly be snappier than this rambling preamble of a story, and hopefully very, very useful to my fellow newbies out there. So stay tuned, stay subbed, stay belled, keep commenting, do the things and the stuff and whatever. All of that stuff to help support the channel. And if there's anything in particular you found confusing, confronting, intimidating, or curious about Monster Hunter, please let me know, and with luck, I'll have some newbie-friendly insight to share on that. If not, well, I'll see if I can find the answer elsewhere from someone better than I am at the game. But thanks for watching, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I do appreciate it as much as I appreciate my patrons scrolling up above there, whose above and beyond support makes a huge impact on my heart. You fill my heart with joy, patrons. Thank you for that, as always. I am Blunty, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time. Happy hunting.